Audio Jungle.
Hi everyone. So in this video we are going to talk about reverse proxy. So reverse proxy is one of the common terms that we use in any server-side application development or system design. So we are going to talk about what is reverse proxy and what are the use cases of using the reverse proxy. So before we talk about reverse proxy, we need to understand what proxy is. So in general, the definition of proxy is if someone else is doing a job on behalf of you, then we call that person as a proxy. I repeat the definition. If someone else is doing a job on behalf of you, then we call that as a proxy. So now let's see how we can apply this concept in the server-side application development or in general to the software development, right? So let's consider a simple client-server communication. So let's say there is a client. So we can call the client as a browser. And let's consider there is a server. And so the server could be nothing but a simple website, like a 123.com website. So now the browser has to talk to the client server 123.com, and it needs to fetch the response back to the client. Right? The browser has to talk to the server, and the server has to return the response back to the client. So this is a very simple client-server communication. So let's see how we can use proxy here. So for example, consider a situation. This website 123.com is not allowed in all the countries. And very specifically consider this 123.com website is restricted in India. And I'm from India and I still want to access the website. So how do I do that, right? Now one typical approach that people use is we can put another server in a different country, say US, and then we can send the traffic from the browser to this particular server. Because the access from India to 123.com is restricted, so this direct access is not allowed here. So the browser can talk to the server in the US, and the server in the US can talk to the website 123.com. And now this server will return the response back to the server available in the US, and the server which is available in the US will give the response back to our browser. Now we have access to the 123.com. So in this condition, the server which is available in US is actually visiting the website 123.com on behalf of you. So we can call this particular server as a proxy server. And actually visiting any restricted website using like this is actually not legal. I'm just explaining this concept to understand what a proxy is. Okay. So now we know what actually a proxy is. But what is a reverse proxy? So reverse proxy is also exactly the same process, but it happens in the other way around. So in this situation, if you look closely, the client is trying to hide its identity when it is talking to the server. Because if the server knows if the request is coming from India, then the server will not allow that traffic. So the client is actually trying to hide its identity and send the traffic from the different server. So that's the proxy. But in case of a reverse proxy, in some situations, the server has to hide the identity before it gives the response back to the client. So that's where we use reverse proxy. Again, we can use another example to see how that happens. Okay, so now we have a client, the similar example, we have a browser, and then we have a server 123.com. Now, this server, right, this server could be your application server, which actually receives the request from the browser, and then it processes the request, it sometimes fetches the data from the database, and then it gives the response back to the browser. So that's why we call this particular server as an application server, right? So in general, the good practice is it is not recommended to expose the identity of the application server to the client, to the outside world. So when I say identity of the server, it could be anything. It could be the IP address of the server, it could be the host name, or it could be the domain name, or any details about the application server should not be exposed to the outside world. Now, how can we achieve this, right? So we can achieve this by using one more server in front of us. We can call this server as a proxy server. So now basically what happens is the browser will send the request to the proxy server, and then the proxy server will forward the request to the 123.com application server. So now all the browser need to know is only the identity of the proxy server. In the previous case, for the browser to reach the application server, it needs to know the identity of the application server. It needs to know the DNS name, it needs to know the host name, or it needs to know the IP address of the application server to reach this particular server. But now since we introduced another server in front of the application server, now the browser only needs to know the identity details of the proxy server. It doesn't have to know anything about the app server. So this is one of the way we can hide the details of the application server from the outside world. Because the situation is sometimes, right, for the application server, you might be keep changing it. So you might be deploying your application continuously into the server, or you might be changing the IP address, the host name, or in some situations, you might be adding more number of servers into the backend because to improve the performance. So all these changes, whenever you do all these changes, the browser doesn't need to know about these changes. I mean, the client doesn't need to know all the changes that you are doing to the application server, because it is still talking to the proxy. The proxy server IP identity is not changing. So the browser will still talk to the proxy, and the proxy will take care of forwarding the request to the application server. So this is one of the approach to hide the identity of the application server from the outside world, and that's where we use the reverse proxy. Since the server is trying to hide its identity in this condition, we call it as a reverse proxy. And this is one of the primary use cases for using the reverse proxy in any server-side application development. But there are some other use cases also available for the reverse proxy. So one of the use cases is caching. Say for example, most of the times these application servers used to return some static assets to the client. So for example, the 123.com could be returning some text content, or it could be returning some images to the browser. But at the same time, these text content or images doesn't change very often, right? So you don't have to hit the application server every time to fetch those static assets. So what we can do, we can cache all those static assets in the reverse proxy layer. So when the browser requests for any assets or any content, if the content is available in the cache, the reverse proxy will immediately return back to the browser. It doesn't have to go to your application servers. By doing this, you are improving the performance of your application server. And caching is one of the use cases. And another use case is, as I already told you, sometimes to improve the performance of your app servers, you may have to increase the number of instances of your application servers, right? Because one instance of the app server may not be enough to handle the traffic. So you might be adding 2 more instances to it. Now the reverse proxy could also act like a load balancer, and it distributes the traffic very even to the instances. Reverse proxy will take care of sending the traffic to all your instances in a very even way. So the another use case of reverse proxy is it can also act like a load balancer. And one of the other use cases is SSL termination. So most of the websites or most of the public-facing applications use HTTPS protocol. So this is not a regular HTTP protocol. It is a secure HTTP protocol, which means the data that has been exchanged between the browser and between the client and the server is always encrypted. So since the data is encrypted in this particular area, at some point of time you have to decrypt the data before you process the data, right? Your application server has to decrypt the data before it processes the data. So who can do the decryption? Actually, the application servers can decrypt the data and then they can process the data, which is actually possible, but it is not generally recommended because decrypting the data itself is a compute heavy operation. So if you do that in your application servers, it might affect the performance of your application as well. So it is a general practice to delegate the SSL termination to the reverse proxy. So your reverse proxy will decrypt the data and then it will send only the raw data to your application servers for processing. So that is another use case for the reverse proxy. And there are several reverse proxy tools actually available in the community, like there is the Nginx, there is Apache, and there are several other tools available. And there are some cloud providers, they are actually providing some load balancers, which also can act like a reverse proxy. And I have also shared some reference links in the video description where you can refer about and read more about the reverse proxy. Thanks for watching.
Audio Jungle.